No thinker has influenced the modern world more than Karl Marx. But what did he really think? I'm Paul Mason, and to mark the 200th anniversary of Karl Marx's birth, I'm going to explain some of his key ideas and why they're still relevant to us today. And the only place to start is here, Berlin, where Marx came in 1836 to study philosophy. When Marx arrived here in Berlin, there were three revolutions underway in the world. There was the Industrial Revolution, there was the struggle for democracy, which had just broken out again in France, and there was the Scientific Revolution. The job of a philosopher was to make sense of it all, and one philosopher in particular dominated people's thinking about social change. Meet Georg Hegel. Hegel said, "All human history is progress towards the goal of freedom. When we campaign for human rights, or make a scientific discovery, or fight a war, that's really the mind of God trying to think its way towards freedom," said Hegel. A world spirit forcing us to act, sometimes in ways we just don't understand. Marx arrived in Berlin 5 years after Hegel died, and in the clubs where the left-wing students drank, they didn't believe in God. They attacked Hegel and his theory of history, and they attacked the Prussian government and the total absence of democracy and free speech. But what drives history is a good question. Marx said, let's start by taking God out of the equation. What drives history is not God, but something specific to our human nature. Our ability to work, and to work to a conscious plan, altering the world around us by imagining something better, communicating it through language and making it happen. That's the essence of our human nature. A lot of people today will say there's no such thing as human nature. If so, we're just a sack of bones at the mercy of our environment and our DNA and our Facebook page, with no real purpose. Marx says the purpose of human beings is to set themselves free. Humans, he says, are a species being. Now what does that mean? Well, when we make something, we're generally not making it for ourselves, but for somebody else. And if we have a great idea, what usually happens is we run off and tell somebody else about it. We exist for each other. We're a social animal. That's why we have a history. We create change. The streets of Berlin have seen a lot of history. In Marx's time, it came to barricades, and then they saw the rise of Nazism and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Marx says the source of all social conflict and the unhappiness that drives it is the fact that we build societies that stop us from cooperating and sharing, because they're always based on private property and they always create power hierarchies. And here's the word Marx uses to describe the result: alienation. We're alienated from our inner selves and estranged from each other. For Marx, alienation doesn't just mean we get depressed, we hate our jobs, or that we feel bad about the world. It means we're constantly using our creative powers in the wrong way. We make things, but the things we make, machines, states, religions, they end up controlling us. So if you want to understand Marx's theory of alienation, just take out your smartphone and ask yourself, do I control this, or does it control me? That's alienation. The things we make take control of us and separate us from each other. By the time he left Berlin, Karl Marx had started a revolution in ideas, but soon he would find out what a revolution looks like for real. The year is 1847. Then, as now, London was the financial capital of capitalism. Here, Karl Marx set out to write a document that still has the power to inspire people and terrify the elite. The Communist Manifesto. But what exactly did Karl Marx mean by communism? Let's get one thing clear. Marx did not invent communism. Even in the Middle Ages, monks held property in common and lived a communal lifestyle. In the English Civil War, the revolutionaries wanted to abolish private property. And, as a young radical, Marx was surrounded by workers who wanted to live in communes, like Etienne Cabet, who told his followers to move from Paris to Texas to set up communes, none of which survived. Marx said communism means abolishing private property, but to get there you need two things: technological progress so that machines do all the work, and social progress so that everybody can live a rich, rounded, cultural life. By 1847, Marx was active in the Communist League. These were mainly German workers. They were revolutionaries and wanted men in their own country. It was in this pub in Soho, London, that Marx and the Communist League sat down in November 1847 to thrash out, what does communism stand for? After days of arguing, the workers said to Marx, you go away and write it all down in a manifesto explaining what communism really is. And be quick about it, because the revolution's coming. A spectre is haunting Europe, Marx wrote. The spectre of communism. But it wasn't the spectre of some isolated communes where people shared out the work and the food and practiced free love, though these places existed. Communism, said Marx, can only happen through a working class revolution. All history is the history of class struggles, Marx wrote. In ancient Greece and Rome, it was slave against master. In medieval times, it was the serfs against the lords, sometimes the lords against the king, and sometimes the king against the pope. But industrial capitalism had made things very simple. It's the workers versus the capitalists, a death match, and if the workers win, you get a whole new kind of revolution. You can see where the idea came from. In the 19th century, workers had almost no possessions, they worked 12 hours a day in bleak conditions, and most middle-class people despised them. But Marx said, they are the future of humanity. But it didn't happen. Here, in the very same street Marx lived, in poverty, there are now plenty of workers and they own plenty of property, and they have no obvious intention of overthrowing capitalism. There is a tension inside Marxist thinking about the working class. Sometimes he says they are destined to overthrow capitalism, whatever the ideas they hold in their heads. But at other times he says the workers are going to overthrow the system because they are conscious and educated and have strong ideals. After the revolutions of 1848, Marx spent his life here in London trying to educate socialist-minded workers and form an international party. But what those workers actually built were organisations to help them survive capitalism: socialist parties, cooperatives and trade unions. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx set out ideas that have remained influential. That the everyday struggles of working people actually lead somewhere, to a better society, and that they, the workers, the peasants and the poor, have far more in common with each other across borders than they have with the elite that rules their own country. As the final line of the manifesto says, workers of the world, unite. One day, the people of Paris decided to stop work, build barricades, and overthrow the government. That's what we call a revolution. I'm Paul Mason, and in this episode we're going to look at what Karl Marx learned from the experience of two revolutions that happened here in Paris. In 1848, the French monarchy was overthrown. Within days, the revolution broke out in Berlin, Budapest, Vienna and Milan. Who's in charge? The elites of Europe asked. Fingers pointed to the author of the Communist Manifesto, holed up in the Belgian capital of Brussels. The police immediately put Karl Marx on a train to the French border, minus his luggage. Marx arrived on the 5th of March 1848 and he came straight here to a mass meeting of the most radical organisation in Paris, the Society for the Rights of Man. And he made a speech. He said, when a ship is caught in a storm, time to throw somebody overboard. He meant the rich, of course. The revolution had been led by the upper middle class, the bourgeoisie. What they wanted was democracy. But the mass of people in Paris were working class. They wanted democracy plus social justice. Marx understood that the overthrow of the monarchy was just the start. In June 1848, it was the middle class who threw the working class overboard. This, the first ever photo of a social struggle, shows the barricades workers erected as the bourgeois crackdown began. Thousands were killed. This is the exact spot where that barricade was built, and the lessons Marx learned from these events still hold good. You have to fight for democracy, but it's not enough. You have to end poverty and unemployment and inequality as well, and that is going to scare the rich. And this problem, how to defend democracy but fight for social justice at the same time, is the basic problem that has confronted all the recent uprisings from Occupy Wall Street to the Arab Spring. Marx said, if you don't attack the economic power of the elite, sooner or later, it will attack you. After the 1848 revolution failed, France was ruled for 20 years by a dictator, the self-styled Emperor Louis Napoleon. He turned the city into the pleasure capital of the world, the city of light, and widened the streets so nobody could build barricades. But in 1871, they did build barricades, only bigger. These remarkable photographs show the day the working class took control of Paris and launched the Paris Commune. The Commune wasn't just a political revolution, it was the social revolution Marx dreamed of. As the people drove the government out of working class areas like this, Marx understood the Commune was different. It abolished the standing army, it turned some factories into workers' co-ops, and effectively it legalised sex work. People weren't just taking control of the state, they were taking control of their lives. When the French army retook Paris, they killed 30,000 civilians. It's one of the first political massacres of modern times. I've reported from the Arab Spring, the Occupy movement, the revolts in Greece and Turkey, but none of them went as far as the Paris Commune. None of them said, let's replace the state with people power. Karl Marx never wrote a manual of revolution, but if he had, I think it would have said two things. First, democracy is not enough. You have to keep pushing for social justice. Second, you can't take over the existing state. You have to bring power closer to the people.